We don't have a whole lot of time tonight, but this is an important night for me. Here's what I care about. I care about how we get in this war and whether it was sold honestly to the American people. What I understood at the time of us going into war, and I was skeptical as hell about the whole thing, was that there was a nuclear threat facing the United States. Not the region, but us. It was sold to us, that threat, by the vice president over and over again, a mushroom cloud. We were going to be hit here in this country by a nuclear weapon from Saddam Hussein's Iraq. Now, let me ask you this. When you were hearing the president making those claims, when you were hearing the vice president make them over and over again, especially the State of the Union address by the president, what were you thinking?
I have to tell you, it wasn't until Secretary Colin Powell and his speech before the UN that I began to think, wait a minute, the intelligence that I know about, what I'm privy to is thin and patchy, and it's not matching up with this overarching administration rhetoric. Up until that point, I have to say my head was sort of in the operational weeds. I was busy running secure operations, trying to get intelligence to the policymakers.
There were 2 points made in the build-up to war about nuclear weapons: the aluminum tubes and the trip to Niger, buying the yellow cake from Niger, the uranium material. Did you know at the time that the president was making the claims about that in his State of the Union that those claims weren't true?
I will tell you, when I heard the now infamous 16 words in the State of the Union address, I thought it was odd. But don't forget, there are 2 other countries in Africa that also mine yellow cake war. Right. So, you know, it just seems strange. And Joe spent the next couple months discreetly working back channels to try to understand how such a whopper got into the State of the Union address when, at least on 4 occasions, the CIA had taken that claim, the nuclear threat, out of major speeches done by the president.
Knowing what you know, do you believe that there was a hard case that we faced a nuclear threat from Iraq?
At what point?
At the point we went into war.
No, I was horrified. What I really was thinking was we just didn't find it. Because certainly Saddam Hussein was a threat. He had used WMD on his own people. There was no question he was a troublemaker. He was, you know, his history was not good. And my sense was maybe we just didn't find it. We just didn't find the right scientists. I didn't find the right person to get into the right program so that we could really understand what was going on.
So the people watching this program and people in this country who said, yeah, I'll go along with the war with Iraq because although I think there's a lot of problems with the war and what it's going to cause us to be involved with, we better act against a nuclear threat. They were misled.
I would say so. The intelligence definitely was thin and patchy, and it was also, don't forget, it was so fast. From the shadow of 9/11, when, as we now know, there was the interest swiftly turned from Afghanistan to Iraq, it was a rush to war, and it takes time to develop sources and to vet them and corroborate them, and we didn't have that time.
You heard from the Vice President's office that the Vice President wanted to know if there in fact was a deal by Saddam Hussein to buy uranium yellow cake from the government of Niger. You know that that was checked out by your husband. Ultimately, he went to Niger and he reported back there was no evidence of that deal, right?
That's correct.
And then you heard the Vice President and the President attest that we faced a threat from nuclear weaponry in the hands of Saddam Hussein based upon this African deal. What did you think then?
Well, again, I was desperately hoping that officers in the CIA, well above my pay grade, had access to intelligence that would support some of these claims, because it's a terrible feeling to think that the government, the administration might be lying to you.
Was that hope justified in the end?
No, it's clear now that we went to war under manipulated intelligence at best.
Scooter Libby, the Vice President's former Chief of Staff, was in charge of intelligence in the White House. He was the President's guy. He was the Vice President's guy. He brought all the information to the President on why we should go to war. All that information about mushroom clouds, all that stuff was coming through Scooter Libby. He was also, as Vice President's Chief of Staff, he had a hand in all the paper flow going to and from the President. Yes. There's no way the President could have given that State of the Union address pointing out the threat of a nuclear war, a nuclear weapon in the hands of Saddam Hussein based upon British intelligence that couldn't have cleared through his desk.
I would assume so.
Okay, let me ask you this. When they began to target you and your husband and began to put out the fact that you were covert, and we know Ari Fleischer did it, we know that Karl Rove did it, we know that Scooter did it, we know that Armitage did it, we know that there's all kinds of evidence that there was a real scattergun attempt to get the information out about you from the White House. Did you believe then that they were covering their trail, that they were trying to prove that they were right or disprove that your case against them was factual?
I think they were furious that Joe had the audacity to go after the primary reason, their primary rationale for war in Iraq, which was a nuclear threat. Right. And then they went after me. And I don't think there's any question, as Special Prosecutor Fitzgerald noted in a filing, he said something like, he can't imagine any evidence that would disprove a conspiracy by a multitude of people in the White House to discredit and undermine Joe Wilson, because Joe's op-ed piece went to the heart of their argument, and it really shook them.
Were you surprised that the president commuted the sentence of the chief of staff to the vice president?
Not surprised. Deeply disappointed, naturally.
Do you think he'll be pardoned ultimately by the president?
I wouldn't be surprised. I don't think the president really cares anymore.
Are you surprised that much of the White House press corps, a lot of them, act like this never happened? A lot of people act like there was no criminality because the sentence was commuted. If you raise the issue like I did a couple of weeks ago that there was criminality in the White House, they say, what criminality? It's become amnesiac. They've forgotten what they did because the sentence was commuted. I'm asking you. I find it fascinating to be in the middle of a case and have a case brought to a jury and all these counts of criminality, long prison sentence decided by the jury and the judge, and then all of a sudden people say they don't remember it happening. What criminality?
What struck me about the Libby trial, one of the things, besides the reckless way in which my name was used by senior administration officials, but truly the symbiotic relationship, and not particularly a healthy one, between the Washington press corps and this administration. Access is paramount. Everyone understands that.
What do you think about the vice president? According to the prosecutor, hey, there's a cloud over him. His chief of staff operating with him. I mean, Scooter wasn't out robbing gas stations at night. This wasn't extracurricular. In the line of his duties and work, he performed these services, which led to his incrimination, right?
Correct.
Now they act like they had nothing to do with it. The president plays dumb on this one, to be putting it nicely. He acts like he didn't know what was happening. He said, however, in the beginning of this case, that he was going to deal with anybody who leaked.
Yeah, clearly the president
his way of dealing with them was to commute their sentence.
He's not a man of his word, and that's being charitable.
What is the feeling among your colleagues? I know you were an anonymous source, not an anonymous source, you were an anonymous person within the agency. You're a classic government servant, right?
Very
anonymous
private.
As hell.
I loved my job. I was proud to serve my country.
Your neighbors didn't know what you were doing?
No.
Okay. What do the spooks you work with think? The real hard case spies, do they feel that this impeached their role, that this really undercut them, this whole Valerie Wilson case?
They know that it happened to me, but it could have just as easily happened to them. Something I feel passionately about is the amount of politics that has spilled into the intelligence realm, which distorts and dilutes the product and thereby harms our national security.
When your husband filed that story with the New York Times, attesting the fact that he'd gone on that trip to Niger, and he'd come back with nothing, that there wasn't evidence of a deal. He must have known, didn't he, that he was going to light a match that would lead all the way to you. The fuse was just lit. They were coming to you. Did you think that he wasn't going to light, that match wasn't being lit?
You cannot possibly be suggesting that with Joe's credentials, my airtight cover, that we actually anticipated that senior government officials would commit treason by blowing my covert identity, my affiliation with the CIA, as part of their...
You had already accused them of covering up a false case for war. That's serious business. If they're willing to cover up a false case for a war, wouldn't they out you?
Well, call me naive, but that wasn't on our list of options.
But you know, when you think about it logically now, they were playing pretty tough.
Joe was more than prepared for pushback against him. That was understandable. Yeah. He was made ambassador under George H.W. Bush. Yeah. He had his letters. He had his commendations. He was called a true American hero for his work in the first... So, no, we didn't actually consider that they would betray our country's national security to get at me and to further, take punitive action.
Well, now you know they did.
Oh, yes. 4.5 years later. And it's a story, what I write about in my book. I think the whole thing tells the consequences of speaking truth to power. It's a cautionary tale.
Well, they play rough. I like the title of your book. Fair game.
Thank you. Thank you very much to you, Chris Matthews.
Anyway, thank you, Valerie Plame Wilson. The book's called Fair Game. Some of it's been redacted by the CIA, but you get the gist of it. Believe me. Go take a look at it at the bookstore and buy it. Anyway.